Postal Service for the answer as to why we do not want the government running our airlines. Joining us, Peter Schiff, president of Euro-Pacific Capital, and David Callahan, senior fellow at Demos. Okay, good to have both of you with us. I appreciate it. David Callahan, let me ask you this, though. It's not just some of the numbers we threw out in our introduction, but it's also that no matter what list you'd like to look at in terms of top-ranked airlines around the world, there are no American companies on any of them. And in fact, all the companies that tend to be on them, minus maybe one on some lists, are state-owned or majority state-owned airlines, whether it's Air New Zealand, Emirates, or Singapore, just to name a few. Can the government do a better job?
Well, I think that the government can certainly do a better job in enforcing higher safety standards on airlines, and that, I think, is the most important issue. Flying may be safer now than it used to be, but the question is it as safe as it could be or should be? And I think the answer is no. There are all sorts of evidence of corner cutting by airlines. USA Today did a big study last year, found that 65,000 flights had taken off in the previous 6 years that shouldn't have taken off because of safety problems. Lots of horror stories out there about the airlines contracting out to repair maintenance people who aren't certified or who are under-equipped. So the FAA needs to do a better job, but it hasn't had the resources.
Peter Schiff, I know obviously you're not going to be pro this, but you fly, so you are no doubt painfully aware of how unpleasant an experience it is in this country relative to others.
Well, most of that has to do with the security checks. That's what's really unpleasant, and that is obviously
coming. Well, the food and the dirty seat-back tables and all that add to it, don't they?
Yeah, but look, first of all, let me just correct. When you're talking about this top 10 list, or the top airlines, of the top 5 airlines, Asiana out of Korea is 100% private. Cathay Pacific out of Hong Kong is 100% private. Singapore Airlines, the Singapore Sovereign Wealth Fund, owns 55%, but it's privately run. It's listed on the exchange. The only reason that Air New Zealand is majority owned by the New Zealand government is because they bailed them out after September 11th, but it's a privately run company. See, the problem in the United States is we don't have enough deregulation. We started deregulation, but we didn't finish the process. You have all sorts of anti-competitive regulations in the airline market, and the biggest problem is the airports. U.S. airports, all of our major airports are owned and operated by local governments, state or county governments. The trend around the world, in Singapore, in New Zealand, those airports have been privatized. They are for-profit entities. They're not run by the taxpayers. They're run for a profit by private business, and they're much more efficient. And it's the airports that are really screwing up travel even more than the airlines.
Which is an interesting point. David Callahan, I know, studies would show, obviously, air travel in general is much safer than it used to be. So I think it's fair to acknowledge that. But when people hear the headlines they hear over the past few days, and when they fly planes that they can just see are significantly older, perhaps, than some people feel comfortable, it does add to a perception issue out there. But would more government involvement help at all? I mean, to Peter Schiff's point, sure, some of these have some private stakes in them in these highly ranked airlines, but they do benefit from the government subsidy.
Well, there's no question that more government oversight would help with the safety issue. This Southwest incident was not so surprising. A similar incident took place on a Southwest plane 2 years ago. Southwest paid the biggest fine of any airline levied by the FAA a few years ago, $7.5 million, for not taking care of some of these fuselage issues. And it's very scary. You look at the increasing number of flights are being subcontracted out to these regional carriers, like that flight that went down outside of Buffalo, or the Air Midwest flight. The 3 major accidents we've had in the last 7 years have been by these regional carriers who aren't really well supervised. It used to be that most maintenance took place at a few of these major hubs. Now maintenance is taking place at 5,000 different facilities, and it's dangerous. It is dangerous. This is another example of what happens when you don't have strong enough government oversight.
That's not an example that, first of all, airlines are very concerned about safety. Reputation is very important for an airline. People aren't going to fly an airline that they don't think is safe. Government doesn't do this. If anything, maybe you can cut corners because you have government inspectors. Part of the problem is you've got the government regulating all the routes, and it's so uncompetitive, and the government favors a lot of these airlines that have bloated costs. The government's bailed out the airlines by guaranteeing their debts. They're heavily involved in this industry. They're not letting it really restructure in a way that I think would make it much more efficient. And the more we get the government involved, if the government took over the airlines, one of two things would happen. Either ticket prices would go way up and very few Americans would be flying, or taxes would have to go way up because we'd have to subsidize the airline industry because they'd be losing a fortune.
Safety versus price. If we ever get there, I wonder what the choice will be. Well, gentlemen, I'm only going to hit pause on this because it's a topic we love to talk about here on this show. I will just say this to both of you. Peter Schiff, if you haven't flown Emirates, and I'm sure you have, wow, it's heaven on earth.
Look, I've flown all those airlines, and yes, they do have great international service. There's no question about it.
All right.
That international service, but it's not because of the government has an investment stake in those businesses. They are privately owned, for-profit airlines.
Well, not Emirates. All right. Well, thanks very much.
Well, it's owned by the wealth fund.
I gotta leave it there. So we'll no doubt continue to